podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead Podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you could please do that before we get into the show, I would much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. So this week, we're going to get into a little bit of Olympics, little this and that. Just a foreshadow that, hey, I don't know. As always, man, just take the best part for yourself. Peace. Peace. I'm Jesse.
Peace, my brother Justice. What's happening?
Peace. Yeah. Recuperating from the Sunday nap, as they say.
Hey, man, the blessings of getting older and better.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to jump in today on something, we talked a little bit about the Olympics and the I guess it's kind of twice in the last couple of weeks in the person of the Team USA in terms of men's basketball, and then some of our, you could construe our Sha'Carri Richardson commentary as related to the Olympics. But generally, the Olympics is been going and rocking and stepping away from all of the the other sort of weird issues about the Olympics as an entity and a thing where these countries that spend this money and all that stuff, because there's plenty of read on that in terms of it, possibly not like, why are we doing this?
Right. In terms of being like some sort of like destructive force that cripples cities or countries that everybody chooses to actually do every 4 years and fights for the ability to do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Build stadiums no one will ever use ever again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But given the conditions, what I guess maybe we could start and we can go wherever. But was this generally just trying to be a consumer of the Olympics? It's been sort of weird. It's like, I don't know when nothing's on. I don't know if it's me because of the way I engage with content and television now, where I don't, I watch everything on you stream it, or you know when it's happening live and you turn it on if there happens to be something live. But it seems like I can't keep track of like none of the cool stuff that you usually like, the big events, like the women's 100 final, I think was last night. I had no idea.
Well,
no nothing. It was just like, the Jamaica team, Jamaica, you know what I'm saying? Squad got all 3 spots. And it was like, oh, great. But so yeah, how's this happening for you?
Well, one is, I think it's a sign of the times we're in, and then also just the choices. Like, it doesn't, I think especially about Barcelona in 92 particularally, and to some degree Atlanta in 96, but I would say Barcelona in 92 probably because I was in high school. We were in high school, right? So it's like, we watched the Olympics. But during the middle of the summer, that's like the only thing happening, right? Because you're not watching those 3:00 baseball games. No disrespect to all of my people who love to watch baseball in the middle of the day. But the Phillies weren't good during that time, so that sucked. So I didn't watch those games. Basketball's done, right? And so the Olympics literally was the middle of everything, right? Like the Olympics was it. And then you just get to a place where like now there's so many options and so many shows, there's so much going on. It's no longer it, right? It's no longer like the biggest thing. Then the time frame, right? Because we're not talking about even Barcelona or London or, wherever. We're talking about Tokyo, right? And so people are putting stuff on. I kind of feel also like putting this on as like a high school musical. Like there's these really qualified people who are just way in over their heads because of the unique time that we're in, right? So they just like put the show on, like, run the race now. Like, and you wake up like, oh man, the women's 100-meter, which before would have been like everybody across the world is watching the women's 100-meter final, right?
Yeah.
Like Sha'Carri Richardson notwithstanding, like everybody would be watching that. So the fact that we have a situation where something that big can happen and we just don't have no idea, right? I will say on the positive side though, and this is a somewhat selfish motivation, but the inclusion of skateboarding in also the BMX stuff is an interesting space to kind of, that does have a conversation about what we think are sports and how that has to evolve, right? Like the things you think are important, those can't be the only sports we have. But we have new things that are important to people that they want to watch, right?
Yeah.
So I think is an interesting thing. But I also say it was weird because like the Olympics and the X Games was on around the same time too, at least on the skateboarding tip. So it felt like there's some people not go to the Olympics, right? There's some of the best skaters in the world not go to the Olympics because they're in X Games, and so I just think it's one of these interesting times where there's so many sports, so much stuff, but people's attention is so many other places that it gets difficult for us to kind of pay attention in the way that I think we would normally.
Yeah. Well, and something I would want to get out there, I think that's the general reality that it is sort of out of place, from when it was supposed to happen, as everything is sort of out of place due to how what the pandemic has been. And I mean, I think maybe we'll come back to in the closing of this conversation tonight. And you get, so there's I think there might be an aspect of just sort of like, even though I guess I wasn't setting my clock to the next Olympic Games coming, but just the general sense of like, okay, here's the schedule, and usually you do this week, and then you close all those, the gymnastics finals was big, the 100-meter men's and women's, the 400 men's and women's, the relays, the the more popular team sports, are some of the ones that you always, catch. Now I know for folks that's into all of them, some of the other sports that are not, like you mentioned, like skateboarding, being newly added. People may not have been tuned in to catch that, but I'm sure there's people that enjoy skateboarding or love people that do enjoy skateboarding. They're like, I know for myself, I want to check it out. I'm gonna try to see if I catch the replay if I haven't missed it already. But just seems just out of place in a way, and maybe it's supposed to be. Maybe it's just
I think the question is right now is, are the Olympics supposed to be what you're thinking about? Now that also brings to bear a whole host of other questions, right? Because there's a whole bunch of other shit that maybe we shouldn't be thinking about either that we do, right?
I'm sure somebody yelling across the thing, the eviction moratorium is about to end. How could you be thinking about the Olympics? I'm like, I know they're both not equal issues at all. Right, but you know what I'm saying, when you're dealing with the balance of thought, and I think it's something I guess that bears in mind. The way the experience of the pandemic has made people like frame questions of what we should or shouldn't be doing, but then it also begs the, it sometimes we land kind of on something where everyone agrees, like, yeah, man, you should cut back on this, due to the pandemic, and we need to keep those early on, like we need to keep the PPE, for the frontline workers. Like, yeah, word up. Once the production challenges and the bubble of getting that out was passed, that no longer necessarily became, at the same degree, at least not in the United States, an issue of sort of like, are you morally doing the right thing right now with your time? But then became, for a lot of people, like, oh, well, so you're stuck in the house, like entertainment and keeping your mind from, engaged, keeping your mind engaged, not necessarily not keeping it from being engaged, became important. And so then with that, any number of whatever you would be doing, watching, whether you're making art or drawing scribbles or playing, board games via, communication software with your friends and family, like all these things, like the ideal of what are you doing with your time is actually important, even if it even if we have the inclination, and especially depending on the age range or time you were raised, to be like, if you up here watch soap operas, you wasted time with your life. But also in the middle of a situation where you being destabilized socially, sitting and locking into a little, 2 or 3 hour, soap opera binge might be just the thing you needed that day. So that you could be in a better mind state, or be relaxed, or not have your blood pressure be up, thinking about, the impending doom of a, of a viral infection, right, attached to potentially a wildfire or a flood or some other natural disaster that was happening, or being evicted, or any of these other, terrible things that could happen. So it's like this weird or very interesting thing to me. Is like, well, why have the Olympics? It's kind of like, well, because whether we think in the larger sense of human reality that having Olympic events, games are a thing that's very important, we have already established a world where for some people it's very important, and then people have spent like the whatever the entity in Japan is called that does the Olympic stuff, like money has been spent, like contracts have been signed for all kinds of entities and companies and people that, again, all affects people. So it's not just like, oh, well, they just doing it for the money. Like, yeah, everyone knows they were doing it for the money. And that money, I'm sure a hefty profit goes to the shareholders of various different entities that own parts and pieces of these things, but also the people who work in those companies, do those jobs, and exist in those spaces and work in those government entities in the country of Japan, and the delivery services, the food services, like all the other cascading things that are attached are also affected, right? And the idea that you just, like, you sort of, I don't know, it gives the space to me for some ambivalence about being very strident and like, well, you just shouldn't be doing it, because we should have just focused all those resources on more fighting the pandemic, or fighting whatever, maybe not the pandemic, right? Right.
Right. Insert issue. Right. Yeah, I think it goes to, well,
right,
to your point of, we have been more open to have a conversation of what's important to people is important, right? Hence, people need getaways and stuff, and it does go without saying that there's a set of people in the world, not unsubstantial number of people who actually have trained their lives to get to this place, right? They have dedicated their families. They have been, and you may debate, should be spending money on it, but there's tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars spent across the world training these athletes to be the best in the world at what they do, right? And if it's okay to watch the best of other people be, who got the best movie, then why can't we watch who's the best, javelin thrower, right, in 2021? Like, it's all game here, right? It's all game, and the reality of how capital flows, that we weren't going to allocate, the folks in Tokyo weren't going to, and the IOC wasn't going to reallocate that money towards PPE or getting computers for kids in Bermuda.
Yeah.
Right. Like, that's not how, even if you assumed everybody adopted a stoic vantage point and said, hey, this is how we're moving, that kid wasn't seeing no computer. So, the capital wasn't going to be redesigned like that. I think some folks sometimes have this idea that, like, people will take money that was dedicated to one thing and just put it to something else because
resources that
that's
are
where
being
it should be dedicated
used are just sitting on, sitting in a conference room somewhere, and they go, yeah, we're going to go in and get the money for this thing today to do it. And it's like, yeah, it's not really like, there's all kinds of chains and steps and, and I'm not saying that any of these things are good or bad. I'm just acknowledging they exist. And so when you make the decision, if the contractor, that got the construction loan to work on, rooming house 7 of the Olympic Village, you know what I'm saying? We might be he, I don't know the person. Yeah, I'm just totally generating this contractor, but I could imagine, if it was happening in Portland, it may be somebody small contractor that's like, yo, I got this big deal, man. I'm building this housing for the thing.
Right.
This is the moment to change the trajectory of my company for all time, because now I can be bonded at higher levels, and I can do this and I can do that, and I can subcontract to these people, and then, right, like, which might end up being a subset project, like, not all that much money in other people's sense, but then they find out, yo, remember that deal you was gonna get, and the bonding was gonna change, and you was gonna be able to subcontract it. Yeah, you ain't gonna be able to do none of that, dog. We just canceling all that, like, because because if something get canceled, it's the little people stuff gonna get canceled. They ain't canceling the big company stuff, right? I can't say that I could be comfortable just like, don't do this, don't do that, because my thought would be, given this fully fictitious scenario I've created, that if whatever they're building, maybe it could be repurposed after the fact. So it might be good, especially if that contractor has outlaid resources to get set up to do the job. And then we say, oh, we're not going to do this at all. And we're not going to pay you back for the money you spent to be able to be ready. It's like, it's a mix. And I think I guess this running through my head of like, jabs, I've read or seen just about the games, and like, is why do we do this? And it's the nationalism and the woobity woo. We do stuff. We're humans. We do stuff. We come up with these ideas. They seem like great ideas. We get down the road on them, and then real consequences get attached to them. And it's not as easy to just walk away or give them up. Back to something. Yeah.
To some degree, it's like, hey, you want to see who these people are, who you think are the best athletes in the world. And again, I think there was a time, especially any of us who came up post Cold War, not post U.S. Soviet Cold War explicitly, right? And how that started to show up in sports. And so you had the situation where you had these athletes from other places that are just really good, right? And you only see them every 4 years, right? Because they're behind the curtain, so to speak. And I would say one of the other challenges is, because our world we are in the throes of globalism, you've seen these athletes, right? In many sports. I'll use basketball for an example. Mm-hmm. It's not as big of a deal because it's like, you see these people all the time. Right? You've seen all these players. There's no one surprising you. There's no Tony Kukoc, right? There's no Sabonis, how it was back in the day, right? So I forget the dude that was good from Australia, 92. There's no one, I'm talking about, like, there's nobody surprising you. Yeah, Oscar Smith from Brazil, right? Like the basketball player no one's ever seen. And he plays against the dream team and gives them 25. Mm-hmm. So, and again, in track and field, we don't have this kind of culture anymore of the dominant 100. After Usain Bolt, I think everyone's just kind of like, what comes next? So I'm just using those as examples of hockey. Obviously, you see people all the time Winter Olympics. So you just don't have, like, the globalism, I think, has rendered the Olympics a little less important, right? Like, than we traditionally have expected. And so it's less important. The U.S., as people would say, was in the throes of a racial reckoning. Further we get away from it, the less being real, the less I think it was a racial reckoning, right? Because a reckoning makes you stay with it. A reckoning doesn't say I gave it to office and I'm done, right? But you could frame it in that sense to be like, well, we're dealing with this issue, so we should kind of pay attention to this. But there's also just the fact that the world is so open and everyone's seen everyone. I think that's one of the reasons that the Olympics
I haven't got to look into the story, but I was
different
curious.
to me. I think the guy that won the 100 meters was from Italy, but he grew up in El Paso.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, this dude from Italy.
Right.
So first you go and check, right? Then you think, okay, is he like, he could just be Italian, read white, right? Or, because that's what you really think, right? He could be Italian, read white. Or he could be the new Italian. He could be an Italian, like Giannis is Greek, right? Or like Lennox Lewis was Canadian. So, but yeah, you come to find out, like, yeah, he was born here, stayed here till 9, and then his family moved, and they became Italian citizens. And he's the fastest man in the world right now, post Usain Bolt, right? So I think a lot of that kind of stuff also is different because we don't have the situation where you had this idea of like these people who were extremely nationalistic. And maybe he is very nationalistic, I don't know. But if basketball is any indication, these guys been here, they lived in Montserrat or they lived in a Virgin Island and then they went here. So you just don't have that same energy of the nationalism. I mean, I think in other countries that's still present, but, also in America, our best 11 players aren't playing.
I think the only other thing,
or 12 players, right?
I could put on it.
It's just not playing.
Might be something I think can,
because they're all hurt up and beat up.
Maybe expand out.
So
like
I get
the same way the
but
NBA
that's
season
also just drawing it up.
Even football season and all the sports seasons, but other businesses basically, I think, sort of went like, look, we got to get through this year so we can protect the next year. so like, this might not be the best Olympics you can get to see, but this is going to be the Olympics you're going to get to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying, right. Like you thought you was gonna come out with a whole new design.
AKA something that your grandmother said to you.
That we make, but you know what I'm saying?
This might not be the
2021 one, so we
get
to the 2023 model. You know what I'm saying? When people are, things are better, we do more, whatever, supposedly as it is in pertains to products and services. Like I think there's a lot of like, can we get through the day? We do got some rumbles of some adjustments from the income change in some, at least in some places, and challenges around, what we would consider, before the pandemic, we would quite with a lot of confidence consider low wage, low skill, also low value work, in all the various way our food systems operate. But as we see the number of things that, a lot of places people ain't taking them jobs and they like, well, maybe I get a better job and maybe I can get a better opportunity, or you're going to need to pay me more, or you're going to need to give me a bonus, as to the degree that we enjoy the convenience of being able to access food in many different forms very quickly. Even if you are in a food desert in this country, there's compared to some other circumstances, you can still get the food a lot faster, and in other places in the world or in other times in human history. Yeah.
And can I say something about that real quick? I think this is an important conversation about food deserts versus what I actually like to look at as food swamps. Because I think a desert indicates there's nothing healthy there, which generally is complicated. Now, obviously in rural America, right? I think that is the case, but especially when you get to cities with relatively functional transportation methodologies, in the American context, the place you ain't a desert. It might take you 15 minutes. You might catch 2 buses. I'm not debating that. But also, like that idea, are there some, frozen greens and black beans in the local bodega? Probably. The thing is it up front that you want to eat it? Absolutely not. Right? Like, there are some bananas in there. You just don't want them. But I think of it more as swamps, because I think it's more like a thing where there's all this stuff around, right? And you have to like pick through it and get to it. And kind of like marshy, and it kind of get you stuck. Like a swamp, it gets you kind of energy it takes to where you're at, right? And it's hard to navigate from a nutrition perspective.
that
so
like looking at that and the idea that folks can really get engaged with that. We existed in a situation that presumed a set of conditions, and now that the conditions have changed and changed in a way that was predictable in a sense, but no one really cared until it actually happened. Right. And then they're like, oh yeah, I never really thought about that, but like, yeah, the people at the Safeway, they just be up in there putting the food up like all the time. I don't even be thinking about it. And then like the trucks to bring the food, like, you know what I mean? And then these different layers. And even when you get out to, man, what kind of machine and what kind of structural apparatus is needed there's always thousands of bags of potatoes everywhere. Like, you know what I mean? Like at some point, and then where are all those potatoes starting? And then how are they moving? Right. And for some people, I think this situation has brought those things to the surface. Now, also, they've also quickly become things that people are like, I ain't got time to think about that. That's too complicated. I'm going to push that way, way down in my liver and not think about it to the best of my ability. Similar to, that you get almost, as I guess referencing back to my earlier, they've been like, man, y'all talking about the Olympics, man, y'all need to jump in both feet in this addiction situation. And like, I would like to, but I might want to get at a little bit more time and consideration to make sure I can talk about it in a way that doesn't just make me depressed. You know what I'm saying? Like just keep it at $100, $100 bucks, what do they say, 100 or 100, whatever young people say. For those that are listening, it's like sometimes for some of us, all right. I'll be outside too. It's crazy. Sometimes I can't remember.
You said that like you said that like
you know what I mean? But it's very real, that, especially for folks. I think I've confident, like us who would not only care, but it comes into our work, right, and what we do in our lives. So it's not. I'm not comfortable just flippantly shooting out the hip on some subjects without some thought and consideration, because I'm gonna have to think about it later, and I need to be okay with what I said on here or anywhere else where, and I guess before we get too far away from where we started, my general issue actually right now with the internet as they operate is I've come to understand like, oh, you people you just be shooting at the hip because you don't really have to do nothing with this issue after you get done shooting at the hip on Twitter or Facebook or your Insta, whatever. You know what I'm saying? You go up there, just say whatever, and then you're going to go outside and be like, yeah, man, the system, crazy. Let me get something to eat. You're just going to move on. Like, I'm going to be thinking about it later. So I can't just shoot at the hip, talk crazy, talk without any, thought or consideration. So saying that to say, I mean, I'm always in it mostly though for the Olympics, for the athletes themselves, and like what this experience means to them, what it means that in some of these circumstances, just like where we talk about, to quote the Biggie lyric, either sling a crack rock or you got a wicked jump shot component of this sport may have been something that allows you to change the trajectory of your circumstance within your society. And I do support that. Like if this is something that creates a vehicle for some people in some circumstances to find some pathways or to move, motivate their community, whatever that may be, let's take the good with the bad to try to see it happen. You know what I mean? Maybe next time it'll be better. Cheer. Oh man. So we spoke briefly on the Delta variant last time, and I don't remember exactly what we said, but there's been some changes and adjustments. There's been some recommendations and some other things that have jumped out, really in the week, preceding. And I thought, it might be good to touch base on just so, and I'll speak to it from here. So here being Oregon and Pacific Northwest, it's supposedly been basically recommendations, and it's almost as interesting to a degree, to the degree to which, at least if you read some of these statements that you read in the press, it's like someone's going, we did not mandate that you put your mask back on, but we strongly suggest that you do, right? Which is sort of an interesting thing, this being I might be reading into it. I mean, I guess I'm gonna say two things. One, I'm gonna say, please go do some reading and research. And by reading and research, I mean reading, articles from, at least some ethically bound publications, news coverage, to get your own, get deeper understanding of what are some of what's happening with the Delta variant and other variants. And I'm saying that to I got to go do my research crowd, which sometimes you're giving the implication as if you're going to go read peer-reviewed studies and make a table of some kind and cross-reference information and start doing data points and graphs on what points and I know you're not going to do that. And you didn't do that, but that's what you're making us think you did. But I will say, if your municipality, state, whatever, has released some sort of, instructions, just go read instructions carefully and then assess that versus, your own sense of risk and comfort and make good decisions. So that to say that, my own strategy has been, I'm still certain places I go in. I might have said this last week. When I go in certain, stores to get food and other things, I'm in a weird place where I'd be like, man, I feel like if the staff got masks on, I feel like I should have a mask on. And then, even this recent stuff about the variant that, the not being clear who could be carriers, I still do. It was one of my own motivators with wearing a mask was I don't want to get nobody else sick if I happen to get sick and I ain't know it. You know what I mean? If you was a super spreader in April of last year and you ain't know you was a super spreader because you was asymptomatic and you just like, yeah, I'm just out here living my life. That's part of my own motivation for and in many ways to me, wearing a mask was the least of invasive things to do. Like, I'm gonna throw this mask on, go in the store, get what I need, or make this delivery or go have this conversation. And then I'm gonna keep it moving. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, so it's a weird thing. I mean, I'm trying to check the numbers to get a sense of, because I know there's some places where there's a definite surge, and it's not just the for whatever your political affiliation, don't please lose the idea that it's just the people who you might not like that are experiencing a surge. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot of just people that, for whatever their circumstances, reasons, the public health apparatus that operates where they live, that have not had the opportunity or have been ambivalent or just still don't feel comfortable getting a vaccine and just, it's a challenging thing. And so I really want to be sensitive to, not turning, not adding to the people who don't do this are evil or bad and they're killing us all kind of talk, because I don't really think that helps us. Yeah, so I don't know if I gave you a good foothold there, but I guess just in the preceding things that'll come up around the variants and things, what's something that struck you as important, you know what I'm saying, in the last week?
Well, I mean, one, I think, one, I think the biggest thing for me was,
Mm-hmm.
the idea of how the CDC came out with the information, but then that really just reflects Americans' comfortability with science on a different spectrum, on different parts of the spectrum, right? Because they come out and then they're saying there's new data about this thing, right? And then they use, CDC used pretty charged language, right? Like the war has changed, right? Like that's pretty strong language. And so there are some people who are like, oh, wow, I don't want to talk about people. What I want to say is the way that the information came out based on new information and the variant, and then people's response to what that was, but then the limitation of the federal government in order to say, if you found this information that is incontrovertible, right, you should just suggest people do something, right? Like that's just a broader challenge because it comes out, we're assuming you're saying that this is incontrovertible, this is not debatable, we are facing an onslaught, but then, hey, I think you should wear masks inside. And then you leave it to cities who then respond, or counties who respond a day or later and say, hey, everyone has to do this. But the cities didn't talk about it. They did it off the CDC saying it. but the CDC didn't tell you they had to, but they strongly influenced. You know what I mean? And I think it throws people into play. And then you have the conversation around, well, where is it happening, right? And if you look at the map and everything like that, you have kind of like these red, they use red as the color, these red places where it's occurring. Then you got some other places that don't have, they have only moderate transmission. There's not a substantial transmission due to a variety of factors, right? Mm-hmm. And so you just put everyone in these weird spaces because it's like, okay, well, if you travel to one place, you got to wear a mask, but if you're somewhere else, you don't have to wear a mask inside, right? And so versus it just being kind of this broader national conversation based on, what's happening and people talking about the emergency room. So I just think it's a really interesting thing of how our country, I'm using a big broad brush here, deals with like information. And I guess we should have, January 6th was the indicator of this, or, the idea that there's millions of people who think Donald Trump got cheated. So of course you don't believe scientists. You don't even believe the county clerk in your neighborhood. Right? So if you don't believe the county clerk, you damn sure don't believe this person. So when you have a place that is, and also just think about like this is a country that's trying to continue to compete to be like the tech power and information superpower of the world, where millions of people actually in that place don't believe information. Right. That ain't the truth, right? So you get this kind of this thing of like, okay, how are you going to look at resolving this, especially given people's kind of fatigue, right? And then Dr. Fauci was on television today saying like, America is not going back into lockdown, right? Like conclusively, we're not going back into lockdown. Well, the question starts to be like, you say that now, but before you told us in May when you had to wear a mask, like, and again, now I can
right, and it's even the thing too. I think like
because I can respect science,
and I don't know that man's mind particularly,
but for other people,
I could
that's
see
more proof of them point, why they just shouldn't.
It's like if you ever went to see a medical professional and they gave you a series of things you could do to deal with like an injury or whatever, and it was sort of like, well, you could do this one, but if you do that one, you got to do this. And there's a couple choices where they're just like, I know you're not really going to do this one. So like we've had enough conversation that I'm not even really going to bring this one up. Or I would say, yeah, you're not, you know what I mean? And it's like, at this point, I think people wouldn't, if I think in most states, I mean, even here where people have been, I mean, we've managed this, I think, comparatively very well here, comparatively. If the governor was like, oh, it's going to be a lockdown, I just think people just wouldn't, either they wouldn't do it at all. Like businesses would just be like, we going to stay open. or like, yeah, I'm saying, and people would protest. It just wouldn't hold. Right. So you just go, that's not a tenable solution that people will do. Right. So you go masks, maybe you adjust hours if it gets really challenging. It's I think I felt earlier this year where it was just like basically regardless of what the circumstances are going to be in August, the fall is going to be like the fall has been in the past. School's going to be open, businesses going to be open, stuff going to be happening, and if people get sick or don't get sick or whatever happens, we're just going to let the chips fall where they may. I'm not saying that. I think it speaks to one, our relationship to information, our culture's general idea of like how we connect and how we see sort of solidarity, right, in service to something. And I don't think that I think we are experiencing sort of the limits to what people feel they can comfortably do in mass, right? Like in mass, not individually, so that's not saying there's not pockets of people that are like, yo, if we got to lock down for another 3 months to win, whatever. Right. Now I did read a couple articles that basically like even some of these spikes with the Delta, if folks rock masks for, I think it's in the one CDC article, and I don't Don't quote me, America, or wherever you at. I'll double check. But it's basically like if we had in some places where there's a big spike of it, a couple weeks of really aggressive mask wearing, in a lot of those places, it could slow down because you just wouldn't have as much transmission, right? So then it speaks to that the basic parameters of preventing the spread are still have not really changed, even though and I'll see people kind of encourage or speak like as if they are, but it's like wear a mask, don't be with no whole bunch of different people. If you're outdoors, generally just give some space and it should be cool. Hopefully, you know what I mean? But it is definitely a an eye-opening moment, and it will be interesting as a reminder, like the institutional trust in this country and institutions re-earning, like, to me, institutions practices and communication being better so that people trust them more, but then also the way we engage in the way, I guess I would say some institutions don't do the greatest job of presenting institutions. If you think about like our media apparatuses, and then also some of our own behavior, and I speak of me myself personally. Anybody else, you might be very receptive and responsive to everything that comes your way. But my experience has been that people will replay the tape of how they feel about an entity or an institution, good or bad, when new phenomena occur. And if they are right. And so
right, even phenomenon that's not necessarily relevant to the previous phenomenon. But, and I'll say it. It's kind of it's kind of like the whole thing with like the Tuskegee experiment, right? Like I get why obviously America and white supremacy and racism has continued to be what it's
well, and it goes to that as an individual, especially a lot of things that happened in the past, you can actually look at the details of what occurred and then say, is what occurred there similar to what's happening here? Right. And that's why I challenge people sometimes when they throw out I'm still doing my research. Like, you are not doing a meta-analysis of 100 different peer-reviewed studies and making your own charts and graphs. You're going to whatever you trust, right? Whatever you trust as information and whatever institutions of information you trust, and then going, and then you're weighing that against how, in your internal decision-making apparatus, you make decisions, right? And some of that may be tied into, certain aspects of your identity, your religion, your cultural or spiritual practices. It might be tied into, your sense of pride, all the kinds of things that come into how you make decisions yourself, right? And none of that, there may be certain decisions you make that there's nothing I could tell you that you would ever, like just accept. No, there's no amount of evidence. if there were such a thing, so to speak, that you would just go, oh yeah, Justice finally, he showed me the right set of data. I'm gonna go ahead and get this shot or not get this shot, or I'm gonna wear a mask or not wear a mask, right? Some folks have just decided, and even, I should say this just because I've heard it said when people were like, I'm gonna wait and see, I'm just gonna, I'm just gonna build up my immune system, and I'm always, I know what people generally mean there, but the larger health tell you like just being healthy is how your immune system is healthy, right? It's not like you could be healthy but your immune system not be healthy. Like your immune system is as healthy as it is when you're healthy, which it still may not be in position to stop all things that could come your way from getting sick perspective. I mean, I got something on my mind. And I'm not like, so here, when school starts, kids are going to be wearing masks. I'm concerned about teachers getting sick, heard about, my daughter going through 3-4 different colds because you ain't been around people all day. You know what I mean? She got a winter cold, the summer cold. There's a summer cold that's been going around. People been getting hit with. I don't know if you got anybody out there getting, you just be, feeling kind of miserable. But part of it's because, man, you ain't been around people. Now you outside.
Right. So the stuff that died, the stuff that never was around anymore was because no one was around each other, right? So colds can't flow when no one's around each other because it's not,
right. Yeah. So I just, I guess I hope that I would like people to be informed. But just bear watching right now because if you get a couple bad spikes in some states, might be like we got to do something. like our hospitals are filling up, and again, people that are already suffering are suffering more, and we ain't out the woods yet. We still, a year or two, whatever this is gonna be.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the last thing I would say is I think America has to function as if this will be around for the foreseeable future. And I think from its origin, there was a conversation of
right.
I remember we thought we were going back to work when it happened in March. We back to work by May. Like we were going to get rid of it in 2 months. And then, you know what I mean? Versus like, no, COVID, SARS, all this, they've been around, they happen all the time. And with just how the world functions, it's going to be around. So there may just be some changes to how we function with each other, right? And, I found people will be more comfortable with change when it does not come from governmental institutions. Meaning, we've all changed how we interact with each other because of the iPhone, and you know what I mean, and all these different things. And we've all become okay with changing how we interact with each other, right? We text people instead of calling them, right? We send pictures of stuff to send an idea to them, right? Like we have fundamentally changed the way humans interact with each other, but it came through this idea of an agreement or something that moves society forward versus a edict. And I think especially in America and in some other countries with different, again, like you said, relationships to institutions, people don't respond as well to the change coming from a structured kind of decision-making body versus, oh, my friend's doing it. I can call my grandchildren, send pictures to them or talk to them. You know what I mean? Like my pop, he's the most non-technological. He's more non-technological than me, right? Which is difficult to do. But now he sends emojis and like it does FaceTime. Like, you know what I mean? Like he straight up does FaceTime. You know what I mean? Like, so that's just showing you can change somebody's behavior, but the way that it changes and the way you have the conversation and frankly, the psychology of when are you no longer effective? Because I think there's a play about saving other people now, and given what America has been through in the last, 20 months or so, 17 months, may fall on deaf ears with a population of people. And that's unfortunate because people could be harmed, but those bonds of public trust weren't frankly there before. And even if you were able to pump them up in the short term, but now in the long term, it may go back to not being there. So I think it would be interesting. I think to your point, regardless, I think thinking about those of us who are most negatively impacted when sickness comes, trying to be thoughtful and doing what we can. And I think, public health, hopefully one thing I will say that comes out of this about public health is that we will now start to have more people who are interested in public health as a thing in ways to make sure that the public health conversation stays in our communities and evolves, right? Because I will say, especially for Black and brown folks, and people, quote unquote, people of color, there are constant health issues, right? There's the public health issue around violence, right? Which is becoming a real public health issue depending on where you're at.
Yeah.
And not just physical health, but emotional health. Because what are the impacts of when you really feel like you don't want to come outside, right?
Right. Yeah,
like there's certain cities that I'm like, you know what, I think about traveling to.
Pursuant to the video you shared with me, my brother telling the story, and
that city,
you know
where they're at right now,
where you go.
Like, you know what I mean? So
should I go to that neighborhood?
Like, because they
right
super
now
active.
You know what I'm saying? Like, and it ain't no disrespect to the people, but it's like, yo, maybe I shouldn't go down there. Like they, you know what I'm saying? They going through a cipher and on how I'm moving today.
Right.
This might not be the day for me to be in there. Like I'm gonna gallivant through, you know what I mean, to see the sights and what have you. So.
Yeah, super active. So it's like, but again, from that level of public health to the environmental justice conversations to some of the remaining, we call them comorbidities, but I would also just frame them as public health issues that exist in communities. I think hopefully we will have more people be dedicated to, hey, I want to elevate the conversation around public health on a consistent level, because I think we're going to have a consistent dialogue around public health, given the variety of variants of what this becomes. So.
Yeah. I think I actually might landed at a good place to close. The only thing I'll add is like all these things have always been tied in together. And when we talk about solutions to improving the conditions of people, there's the mix of what are the apparatuses that we have that can operate at scale, as my brother, one of your concepts I like when you bring up, and then also how do people interact with that and how their life is personally structured, right? So what things should have a more public health discussion in just the way you move around in your neighborhood or your community that currently don't, or you don't see the public health role, and where's the line between your personal health and public health? You could really have we need to look at that in the coming year, like, because I think there's a lot of overlap. Even when and a lot of that's to me is a piece of the tension and even some of the decision making. But yeah, so all right, well, man, be safe out there, y'all. Like put do make yourself, as my mother said, she wearing a mask. She ain't my mom. Joyce said, I'm wearing a mask all year. I don't know what y'all doing, but I'm wearing a mask all year. I'm wearing a mask till you sit down at the table if you go out to eat, and then when you eat, then you done put the mask back on. She ain't playing. So, you can feel free to make your own decisions also to everybody out there as it pertains to wearing a mask, because that seems to be more of where somebody, some places at least, might feel the need to let you know that, well, you might not need to wear that mask. And it's like, nah, I'm good.
Right. There's no way you could tell someone you might have to tell someone there might be a good idea. You don't have to tell someone it's not a good idea.
Yeah.
Because that's up to them. Right. That's up to them. That is a personal interaction of how they like to show up in this space.
Yeah. All right. All right. Well, we did that. I think we good. Anything for the good of the order before I let you go?
Hey man, nothing but stay safe, and you be telling people don't take no wooden nickel.
Straight up. All right. So with that, I'm gonna say peace.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to Good Brothers. Thank you to my good brother, Majestic. Thank you for listening to the podcast and supporting my nascent creative project. Please be safe out there. Wear a mask if you can. Get the vaccine if you feel comfortable. Generally, man, just make good decisions. And if you say you need more research, man, really do some research. Don't use the idea of research as a way to just not do anything and just, as I like to say, keep flipping that coin every day and see what works. But anyway, enough of that from me. We record the podcast as regularly as we can. I know it's been a year, but as things adjust with me personally, which I'll be able to engage in more in the coming weeks, I'm actually anticipating a step up in production. So in any event, man, I'm gonna stop talking and let the podcast in. All the requisite things if you listen regularly to do. Please subscribe, rate, share with somebody else, let them listen and engage, and feel free to leave a comment in any of the various places that you might be listening, or on one of these social media situations. So with that, I'm gonna say peace.